Thanks. You can have a seat. We are studying the life of Abraham. I appreciate, again, last week Jimmy filling in and kind of picking up in Genesis 18 where we were. And he talked about the idea of Abraham and really wrestling with that question of, is anything too hard for God? You know, I think that's a real question we need to struggle with, because so often in our lives, like he said, because of faith and fear and doubt and all of those things that come up, so often it's almost like we believe that our God is too small to take care of those things. And we really have to wrestle with the question that is anything too hard for the Lord? And that's where he left us off. He left off the idea that three angels had come, and one of those angels is God himself. Three messengers or angels, and they had had a meal, and the angels, then God basically tells Abraham, this is how it's going to happen, and we leave off with the idea of Sarah laughing, which I think is understandable. This morning we're going to pick it up, and we're going to deal with the God basically having a conversation with Abraham, and then Abraham having a conversation with God. And when you read this text, it appears as you read it that it's a conversation. You need to understand, it's not really a conversation, it's a prayer. And really, if you want to analyze prayer is a conversation, all right? So it's kind of a mixed bag here. So we're going to pick it up in Genesis 18, and we're going to deal with the passage, and we're going to learn a lot at the end. It's going to take me a while to get there, but at the end, we're going to learn an awful lot about prayer, okay? So that's where ultimately we're going, but unfortunately, we're going to deal with the elephant in the room too. So here we go. Let's jump to it. When the men got up to leave, talking about the three angels, the three messengers, and one of them is God, they looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way. Then the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham that which I'm about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation. All the nations on the earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. So that the Lord will bring about for Abraham that which he has promised him. Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know. The men turned away and went toward Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. And then Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will you not, the judge of the earth, all the earth do right? And the Lord said, if I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Then Abraham spoke up again and said, now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes, what if the number of righteous is less than 50, is 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city for a lack of 5 people? If I find 45 there, he said, I will not destroy it. Once again, he spoke to him. What if only 40 are found there? He said, for the sake of 40, I will not do it. Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak. What if only 30 can be found there? And he answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. Abraham said, now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, what if only 20 can be found there? You getting the theme here? For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me ask just once more. What if only 10 can be found there? And he answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. Now, by the way, you're going to learn this next week. Lot's family is living there. There are 6 in Lot's family at least. Abraham doesn't go any lower than 10. When the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he left, and Abraham returned home. So let's make sure we understand the story. What happens is, first of all, what I find interesting is God has come to Abraham. We talked about this last week with the 3 visitors in the tree of Mamre. And the tree of Mamre, by the way, it's a big deal going on in Scripture too. And they have sat down and they have had a meal. And God has come to them. And then God looks at Abraham and he looks at the other 2 guys with him and he says, how about I tell Abraham what I'm going to do? Now that's significant because here's the thing. God doesn't owe them an explanation. God is God. He can do whatever he wants. He doesn't owe you. He doesn't owe me. He doesn't owe anybody an explanation for what he does. He's God. And by the way, it's interesting. The text does not say they cried out to the Lord. It says their cries reached the Lord. And that's significant. In fact, we don't have time to go into it. There's an interesting Hebrew wordplay thing going on between Abraham, who's righteous, and the outcry of the people, and this playing back and forth and back and forth. Because again, remember, there's not a lot of righteous people in Sodom who are crying out to the Lord. This is, their cries came out because 2 things were happening in Sodom. One was moral and one was social. And both issues were taking place and God starts hearing about it. And so God looks at Abram and he looks at the messenger and he says, why don't we tell him what we're going to do? And he looks at him and he says, here's what's happened. Here's why we're here, Abraham. We are going to go down and check out what we have heard about happening down there. It does not say, I'm going to go down and destroy them. He says, I'm going to go down and we're going to go see what's really going on in Sodom. Now, this is what's interesting. Because Abraham knows the second they see what's happening, it's going to wipe them out. That's a given. That's automatically. Abraham's like, look, I don't know how bad you've heard it is, but when you see it, it's worse than what you've heard. So I know you're going to wipe those out. So Abraham then goes to God and starts begging. And he starts having this conversation with God, this bargaining thing. This is the same conversation that you have, guys, when you're trying to convince your wife that you need to go buy something. Okay? And you keep negotiating it down. Okay? This is the same conversation, all right? And he starts with 50, and then he reduces it by 5, and then he goes to 30, and he goes to 1. He just keeps ratcheting this thing down. Till finally he gets down to 10, and he's looking at it going, well, Lot's family's got 6, and not even all of them are righteous, so I'm just going to quit while I'm ahead. And it's interesting because what happens is you see a change in the life of Abraham in his thinking, where he starts to realize God really doesn't have any choice here. And he knows what's going to happen. So he starts going down through this whole list as far as he finally gets it down to 5 and he realizes, okay, God really doesn't have any choice. God's going to have to do what God's going to have to do. He intercedes for this city. Actually, he's interceding technically for the 5 cities in the plain. There are actually 5 cities that are involved in this thing. Sodom is the one that is closest. And a lot of times, whenever we talk about this issue of Sodom and Gomorrah, we automatically associate the sin of homosexuality with it. And while that is true, it's bigger than that. It's not just that. Listen to what Ezekiel says here. Now, this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant. Her daughters is talking about the other 4 cities, the 5 plain cities there. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and the needy. Well, welcome to America in 2023. They were haughty, and they did detestable things before me. Therefore, I did away with them, as you have seen. In other words, what Ezekiel says is there are 2 big issues with Sodom. One is moral, the homosexuality. The other is social. Listen to what it says. Go back to Genesis. Listen to what it says. Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin is so grievous, both morally and socially, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know it. So let's understand that there are two issues playing out here with this whole Sodom and Gomorrah thing. There's a social side and there's a moral side. I can't talk about this passage without talking about the elephant in the room, the moral side of this, the homosexuality side of it. Because the reality of it is, this is a big deal. This is a big deal. Culturally, this is a big deal. Religiously, this is a big deal. I don't know if you're following what's happening in the Methodist churches right now, but there are 81 Methodist churches this year that decided to pull out of the denomination because of their stand on saying we are going to accept this. We're going to allow this. We don't like it, but we're going to allow it. Across America, 10% of Methodist churches have pulled out of the Methodist denomination. They've actually started another deal, a global thing that some of them are joining. Some of them are going independent. Even in our community, 4 churches in Sioux City have pulled out. This is a big deal. This is a big, big, big deal. And you are going to have to decide where you stand. Okay? And whether you like it or not, you're going to have to take a position. Okay? You're going to have to. So I want to talk about what your options are, and I want to talk about where we are as a church. Some people look at this issue and they say, you know what? What happens privately is somebody's own business. They do whatever they want. Here's a problem with that. You can't do something privately without it impacting other people. So there is an aspect of this that does impact others. So that's a problem if you're going to take that approach. Some people take the approach that say, you know what, love conquers all. And you should just let love win, is what they will say. So let me be really super crazy, and then let me get a little realistic for a minute. I love glass blowing. I love my shop. In fact, on my vacation, I spent 6 hours at glass shops, watching people, talking to people about glass. I love my glass blowing shop. Can I marry it? I love it. You go, well, no, that's silly. That's an inanimate object. An inanimate object can't love you back. All right, let's go to something that can love me back. My dog, my cat, a horse, some animal or pet that you have. You go, oh, that's silly. Wait a minute. Before you think that I'm too crazy here, here's what you should know. In 1992, 30 years ago, there's a guy in America that married his horse. In 2005, the Universal Church ordained a guy who went around marrying people and their pets. That's 20 years ago, people. You think it's gotten any better? I mean, that's where we are. You know, if you're going to let love be the basis of it, then you got a problem. Where do you draw that line? There are other people who say, well, you need to understand, Pastor, you got to get with the culture. This is culturally acceptable right now. And you have to go. I mean, we have to do it in businesses, we have to do it, and then we have to, it's culturally acceptable. Listen, just because something is culturally acceptable doesn't mean it's okay. There was a time in this country, it was culturally acceptable to own a person. It was acceptable within the culture to have a slave. That did not make it right. And so as we look at these things, we have to look at it. So we come to it as a church. And we have to ask ourselves, are we going to let culture decide? Are we going to let love decide? Are we going to let people's privacy be good? Here's where we are. When you pulled into the lot this morning, you cannot pull into this place without seeing the word Bible. And there's a reason for that. Because we've decided, no matter what culture says, no matter what love says, no matter what everything else says, the Bible is going to be our final authority of faith and practice. That's what we have decided. So when we come up to any issue, we go back to it and say, what does God say? Now look, I don't care how you cut this. If you don't understand it, you come to me and I will sit down and give you a ton of Bible passages you can go read for yourself. But the Bible makes it very, very clear. to practice this as a lifestyle is contrary to what God says. Period. Period. There's no way. I understand how people get at this. But the bottom line is, for us, we're going to look at it and say, what does God say? And whatever God says is what we have to abide by. Whether we like it or not doesn't matter. Whether it's culturally appropriate or not doesn't matter. We have to say, what does God say? And our position is, God is very, very clear that this is not acceptable in his world. Period. That does not mean that I attack people who disagree with me. That does not mean that I mock them. It means that I love them. It means that I can love them and I can disagree with them. It's no different from other things that the Bible says are wrong. In this particular story, God came down and said, I have heard that these people are doing grievous and detestable things, socially and morally. And if that's true, it's now judgment time. I'm going to deal with it. And God does. So as a church, here's what you should know. We're not changing, and we don't apologize for it. We have never asked anybody who comes here to agree with everything we believe and say and do. We have people who disagree, and that's okay. That's okay. I have friends who have embraced this lifestyle, and they are friends. I do not agree with them. I do not support them. I do not encourage them, but I respect them, and they respect me, and I love them, and I talk to them just as normally as I would talk to you. And what I want you to understand is that, when we deal with this thing like that, this is controversial, and I understand. Some of you are dealing with this in your family, some of you are dealing with this friends, some of you deal with this with people, and you can look at it, and I hope you still keep coming, but if you don't want to come, then that's your call. I will still respect you, and you are always welcome here, and anybody who's practicing this lifestyle is always welcome here. But that does not mean that I will encourage it or embrace it. If you know me, and I'm going to illustrate this, and it may be a little crazy how I'm going to get there, but just trust me here, and I think it'll make common sense to you. If you know me, you know I am passionate about I love my wife. I love her with all of my heart. There's not a person on this planet I care or love more than her. Okay? And she loves me. We have a great relationship. But you need to know, there are things at which we passionately disagree on. And I don't mean just disagree, I mean passionately disagree. So I'm going to illustrate it with probably the biggest issue in our relationship, okay? First of all, you have to know this about me. When I grew up in Lima, Ohio, we moved about every 3 or 4 years. When we were in Lima, Ohio, every vacation we would head down to Louisville and Hallsville, Kentucky to visit my grandparents. And when we go to Louisville, Kentucky, just down the block from my grandmother, she lived within like 3 blocks of Churchill Downs, just down the street from there was this. Now, back in the 60s, when this place first started out, if you don't know anything about this, you're about to get an education. When this place first started out, you could buy a hamburger for 5 cents. Their slogan was, buy a sack. For $1, you get 20 hamburgers. Okay? Now, that ought to tell you right there about the whole quality thing, all right? Back in the 60s, for $2, you could buy a sack, 10 cents a piece. Okay, they're a little more now. They're close to $1 a piece now. But I could not wait to get to Louisville, Kentucky to go to White Castle, okay? I have always loved White Castle, passionately. If they were going to execute me and said, what's your last meal? There it is, baby. Now, this is a glamorized picture of it, and here's why. Because a real White Castle burger, you see that top bun? It usually has about 1/4 of an inch of grease on it. They're called sliders for a reason. I love these things. And by the way, I've had the ones in the store, they ain't as good. There's nothing like going into the restaurant and ordering a sack of these things and sitting down and you go, that would make you sick as a dog. Exactly. They're awesome. They're awesome. And if you're going to die, why not go out happy? So anyway, I love these things. My wife, there is not a time on this planet in her existence in which she is going to eat one of these. Okay? And by the way, I'm going to suggest, if you don't know about White Castle, I talked about these a couple years ago. Had a couple actually drove by a restaurant, stopped and ate. They were sick as a dog for the rest of the trip. So I'm not suggesting you do this, okay? I love them. I have an ironclad gut and it can handle this stuff. So anyway, so I am passionate about that. Now here's what you need to understand. My wife loves me. But you know what? When it comes to this, she will never embrace it. She will never say it is acceptable. She will never eat it. In fact, the closest White Castle restaurant is 223 miles from here. It's located in the southern part of Minneapolis. Okay? We've been there. So let me tell you my wife's rules. You will not bring it into the car. You will not take them home. You will not bring it back to the motel. If you are going to pursue this lifestyle, okay, then here's the way you're going to do it. I have no participation in this. I don't want anything to do with this. So what we have to do when we go to Minneapolis is, I drive her to one of those Kubota places or whatever it is. No, Kubota, what is that thing? Yeah, okay. I want to say Kubota, but that's not it. I'd buy stuff there. So anyway, I take her to one of those places. I drop her off. I drive to White Castle. I go in. I order. I sit down at the table. I enjoy every burger I can until I'm almost sick to my stomach. Then I get in my car. I drive to pick her up. Okay? She then, when we get into the car, she hands me a whole set of mints. Says, here. Why? Does she love me? Yes. Does she disagree with me? Yes. Does she support and encourage this? No. And we just have that understanding. I know it's silly, but this is no different. I can love you. I can embrace you. I can have a discussion with you. I can eat with you, but not here, probably. I can do all of those things, and that does not mean I have to accept it or embrace it. Now, I know it's a silly illustration, but this is where we are as a culture. And people want you to feel guilty. I could look at my wife and go, you really don't love me, because if you love me, you'd let me bring home 2 sacks in the car. I did that one year, by the way. I brought home a sack, and we put it in the trunk. It didn't matter. Okay? When we got home, she said, you will never do that again. Why? She set boundaries with our relationship. And that's okay. She still loves me, and I still love her. I think she's wrong. Okay? I think she's wrong. I think she's missing on one of the great treats of life. But you know what? We can agree to disagree. This issue is no different. This issue is no different. And I know it's kind of a silly illustration, but I think it makes my point. I think it makes the point we're talking about. I can still love you, and I can still have a relationship with you, and I can still have a friendship with you. But I don't have to agree with you. And that's exactly where we are with this particular situation. This situation is Abraham understands that God's going to do what God's going to do. But he has a conversation with God before God goes down there. And I think there's a ton of lessons for us in that conversation in how we pray. One of the things that you see in his prayer, you see a humility in his prayer. God, I was kind of bold to ask you one time. I'm not going to ask you again. But there's this humility of, you don't owe me anything, God. But this is what I would like to see. You see this name it and claim it philosophy that's out there? Abraham's not naming and claiming anything. Abraham is saying, God, don't forget, this is your character. And your character is such that you don't wipe out the righteous with the godly. We saw that in the way you dealt with Noah. So please don't do that here. And God looks at him and says, okay, go ahead, find me 10. Find me 10. And Abraham's doing the math in his head going, man, Lot's family 6, that's tops. And you're going to find out next week, out of that 6, there's only 4. So you see this. You see this played out this way as far as how he looks at this thing. And he approaches that whole idea with this humility of God, look, and this persistence. He doesn't let go of this. He's like a dog with a bone. He keeps going and going and going and going and going and going. God, okay, God, I know I shouldn't ask, but give me just one more chance, God. What about this? What about this? What about this? You see this incredible boldness. He was willing to ask God for the moon here. And I think sometimes with us, we get sidetracked when we start asking God for something, and we lose that boldness, we lose that persistency, we lose that humility. And I think when you learn to pray, when you learn to talk to God, one of the things that you have to do is you have to have some of those elements. One of the things that I see in this prayer is this. It comes out of fellowship. In other words, he and these angels, these 3, he spent time with them. They've had a meal. They've been sitting by a tree, and they get ready to leave. And on their way out, they look at Abraham and they go, maybe we ought to tell him why we're here. It comes out of fellowship. I think your prayer life needs to be a result of your fellowship with God. Instead of making it some formula that you go through or some ritual that you go through, it should come out of a normal, just conversation. I mean, you think about it for a minute. You've had conversations this morning with people. Did you sit down with them and say, okay, you sit in that chair, and I'm going to sit in this chair. Okay, now here's what we're going to talk about. Now here's what we're going to talk about. Now, okay, now it's your turn to talk about this and that. No. You just talked. And that's what you see with Abraham and God here. It just comes out of a natural fellowship of spending time together eating. And as a result of that, the angels look at Abraham and go, why don't we tell him what we're going to do? And Abraham then goes, well, God, what about this? And what about this? What about this? And I think that's what's so important. Sometimes we make this prayer thing so hard, and it's really so simple. You walked in this building this morning. Nobody here, I don't think, anybody walked in this building this morning. Okay, so today I need to conversation with somebody. You didn't think like that. You just walked in and started talking. That should be our relationship with the Lord. I've been doing a lot of roofing since we got back. I got a roofing project at the house, and it's going to kind of be one of those all-summer things. Years ago, it would have been a 2-week deal. Now it's going to be like a 3-month thing, just because I don't go up and down ladder like I used to, and everything's harder. I don't know. Everything's harder. And I'm making it as easy as I can. I went and stopped by the other day, and he looked at it, and he goes, you got like $5,000 worth of scaffolding up. I'm like, yeah, at least I got something to hit before I hit the ground. I said, that's why. And so, but anyway, in doing that, I just talked to the Lord. I don't care if I'm roofing. I'm not sitting down in my office going, okay, Lord, here's my prayer list, and we're going to go through this one more time just in case you miss something. We just talk about it. This prayer, this conversation comes out of a fellowship with the Lord. Another thing that you see, I think, in this passage that sometimes we kind of miss is this idea that it's really more about the person than it is the circumstance. In other words, what happens in this process is Abraham's thinking changes. When Abraham starts with this prayer, it's like, God, you can't destroy them because there's righteous people in there. There's like a whole bunch of them. God goes, okay, give me 50. He calls him on it. Give me 50. So Abraham starts doing the math in his head. Okay, I got 6, maybe. What if it's like 5 less? Oh, okay, give me 45, Abraham. What if there's 40? And before you know it, it's interesting. By the time you get to the end of his conversation with God, he walks away because his thinking has changed. He realizes a righteous, holy God doesn't have any choice here. Well, by the way, it's interesting. You could argue that his prayer or conversation with God does change some of God's thinking because God brings Lot and his family out. Now, whether that was God's original intent or not, I don't know. But we know that Abraham's thinking changed. And this is what I would say. Sometimes prayer is a little bit more about you changing your thinking because you start to try to see it from God's perspective, not what you're doing. One of the things that I've learned just personally, I try not to ask God why. I'm just going to tell you, my experience is this. I've never had why satisfy me. You know, you look at your kids. Why did you do that? I don't know. Are you satisfied? What if they looked at you and said, well, I thought this all the way through, and this is why I thought it was a good decision. Are you still satisfied? No, you got more questions. Why? Because when we ask that why question, it's kind of this, puts us in this spiral in which we don't get anywhere. Kind of like tires in the mud. You just keep spinning. I know some of you don't remember mud, but it comes with rain. It'll be there. But it's that idea of why doesn't answer it. Instead, I try to pray. I don't do this all the time. I try to pray, Lord, how can I respond in this situation to best honor you? Lord, what can I do here so that people will see you instead of me? I've learned those questions, first of all, they're harder questions. Secondly, they require something of me instead of something of God. But they do help me try to see what I'm dealing with from a different perspective. And that's what God does here with Abraham. When this is all said and done, Abraham sees this differently. And that's what I would challenge you with this week, is trying to see it differently. That in your prayer time, instead of asking God, why are you doing this? Start asking God how he can use it to glorify him and his name and his mission and his purpose here. How can God use you in that situation? And that's what you start to see. So I end this morning with this. May you deepen your prayer and fellowship with God this week. May you develop a genuine intimacy with God. May you converse with him in such a way that your heart becomes in tune with his. Learn what it is to intercede. Be humble, sincere, committed in the things that you take into his presence. May your heart be changed as a result of your prayer life this week. Let's pray. Lord, use us, help us, guide us, direct us. Lord, we have people that we love and care about who have no knowledge of you. And Lord, often we are the only thing that reflects you in their life. So Lord, I pray that you'd help us to live well in front of them. Lord, I pray that in our own lives we would learn to love as you love, that we would learn to care as you care. That, Lord, people would see you in us. And Lord, as we deal with sometimes difficult cultural issues, Lord, I pray that through all of it, that, Lord, we would speak the truth, but that we would speak it in love. That, Lord, people would be able to see that we can agree to disagree, that we can be on different sides of an issue and still love, and that, Lord, you would be able to use our lives in front of them. And when it is all said and done, Lord, may you be honored and glorified in all we do. These things we ask in your name.